Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
And this is our review of Be Water, the new ESPN 30 for 30 documentary that came out a little bit ago, but we're still going to review it anyways because we still feel that it's relevant and it's a good thing to talk about because there is a lot inside this documentary, all about Bruce Lee's life and his upbringing and how he became to be the legend that he is. RB3, right away, you just saw this movie, so I kind of want to have your first thoughts, your take right now.
Yeah, this was a great 30 for 30. It perfectly, I think, encompassed the journey, the Hollywood journey that Bruce Lee went through. And I think that's where a lot of people, I think walking into this, you think it's the ESPN, it's 30 for 30. It's going to be focused more on the athletics of Bruce Lee and his training and his actual tournaments that he used to participate in. But it's actually way more focused on the Hollywood journey that Bruce Lee went through and the lane he paved for both Asian representation in American cinema and for the representation of martial arts in cinema. So he paved a lot of ways. It highlighted a lot of those things, and it highlighted the journeys and the struggles that he went through, getting to the point that he is now. So, or at least to the point of remembrance that we remember him for now. So it's a really great movie on that sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've talked openly almost on several episodes of the Mean Enough podcast about my connection to Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, I grew up on Bruce Lee. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I think I saw Enter the Dragon, introduced to by my brother, because my brother's a big martial arts guy. He also grew up on Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and all this martial arts Hong Kong cinema. So I grew up on that, and he immediately captivated me and made me fall in love with martial arts and made me fall in love with him and the idea of power and the idea of movement and the idea of all this kind of stuff that could be seen in Asian martial arts that we've seen for the past hundreds of years that a lot of people don't know about. So obviously my connection to martial arts is deep and profound. I still watch MMA and UFC. I've been keeping up with the sport for the past maybe 13 years. It's something that I feel like it's one of the best forms of self-expression and power and all this kind of ideas that Bruce Lee expressed. And if you think about it, man, just because I do consider to be myself a little of an MMA, not expert, but like kind of expert, he did kind of start this movement. What made Bruce Lee was the fact that he said, wait a minute, this martial art's really cool. This martial art's really cool. What if we take this movement and add this movement? What if we take this wushu movement and add this Chikando movement and this karate movement here or this karate punch there? And he started to fuse them to kind of make his own style of martial arts is kind of what he did. Throughout the documentary, they talk about how he fused all these styles and then he kind of essentially made it his own kung fu.
And it is gung fu, right? Gung fu.
Yeah, I forget the exact pronunciation, but yes. And he taught classes on this, and he wanted to introduce this to a new generation of people, a different type of people. And I love how they talked about his upbringing and his life in San Francisco and how he wanted to show people what is martial arts and what is Asian to him, to people of all races and of all backgrounds. And I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is really the most moving part of the documentary. And especially as a black man, what Bruce Lee represented for representation of Hollywood cannot be unfounded, because when he was on the studio lots back in the 1960s and 1970s, especially during the 60s, it was really only him and Sidney Poitier were the people of color that were on in a lot of these movies and being leading men. So it really speaks to how how Bruce Lee represented himself to the American audiences, despite him having producers tell him that he can't star in a TV show because his accent is too heavy. Despite him having numerous fights about adding more substance to his work than just it being just straight up about karate or whatever, and taking influence from people of his contemporaries like Muhammad Ali, the way he shuffles his feet, the way he moves, and the people who's trained. And I also, one of my favorite parts about this documentary is shedding light on his training program and all the people he's trained, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jay Sebring, Sharon Tate,
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen, yeah, and thankfully, unfortunately, once upon a time in Hollywood, kind of painted Bruce Lee in this kind of like silly, comedic, like kind of over the top way. But I'm glad this documentary happened so then that we could see a real authentic understanding of who he was as a person overall, instead of them taking this icon and just kind of making fun of him.
Yeah, that to me was the biggest standout of this documentary. I mean, there's several standouts, but the biggest one to me was Bruce Lee taking every racial stereotype of an Asian man and breaking it, literally breaking it with his fist. The idea of being looked down upon because of your meekness, being looked down upon because you're smaller, literally in stature, because you can't ignore the fact that Bruce Lee is my height. He's a shorter dude. But the fact that in reality, Bruce Lee is 8 feet tall. Like, homeboy is just like the most confident, most powerful man there was. Like, man. And he's an Asian dude. Like, he happened to be an Asian guy who held himself to a different standard. He demanded respect from his peers, his white peers around him in Hollywood, and he demanded to be heard. I love that scene when he said, "I want this stuff in my script to be in the final script. Otherwise, I'm not doing it, and I'm not showing up on set." Like, he really did hold his own back when minorities really couldn't hold their own. Like, obviously, big name actors could do that, and they've been known to do it in Hollywood, even nowadays. But back in the day, like, that's kind of a little too bold for white Hollywood to accept this Asian guy being like, I'm not doing it unless you do that. And that he still did it because he's like, I'm not budging. I'm going to be who I am regardless of what you want to paint me as. That to me was just one of the biggest standouts of this entire documentary. And I love that aspect.
Right. No, I think that to me is one of the many reasons why I think this documentary was successful. I think it being on ESPN was a great audience because I think a lot of people who are ESPN viewers are more familiar with the sport of Bruce Lee and the athleticism behind him. But, he telling this story and giving this Hollywood story on ESPN gives it a whole different perspective to a lot of the people who are watching and maybe don't understand the importance of what Bruce Lee represented in Hollywood and what he represented in the movie industry. And they even show clips in the movie when they're talking about like Breakfast at Tiffany's and, Mickey Rooney wearing the goofy yellow face and John Wayne playing Genghis Khan and all of these like really terrible representations that were happening before Bruce Lee and how much the landscape shifted and, how much what I don't think was necessarily touched outright in the documentary, but what's kind of implied is the kind of impact that Bruce Lee had on the Black community and how, before, while there were Blaxploitation starting to creep into the mainstream during, the early 70s, what filled up a lot of Black cinemas were karate movies and martial arts movies that were Bruce Lee starring and were directly influenced by what he did and everything like that. So it's really brilliant stuff. And I'm glad that I believe the director's name is Bio Nguyen. He did a great job highlighting how much of Bruce Lee's life was dedicated to his principles, his morals, and not breaking his convictions and having a great representation of himself and of Asian people on screen.
Yeah. If my final thoughts are exactly that. My thing is, there's one quote in the movie. I'm going to butcher it, but I'm still going to try my best. He says that Bruce Lee realized that the people he can teach in his class were 100. He can teach 100,000 through film, and it's the idea of the power of film. The idea of when the guy said Hollywood is racist because America is racist. And if I can show a different representation of what you think this thing is supposed to be on film, then I can teach people what is martial arts, what is Asian cinema, what is all this cultural stuff that he really wanted to teach to people. This was a lesson for them, and to see it in an entertaining fashion, the power of film. That to me inspired me, because that's kind of what brought me to Hollywood personally. And that's me still taking inspiration from Bruce Lee from the time I was 6, 7 years old to now, realizing that that's why I'm in Hollywood, is because I do realize that film can be a tool for teaching. And Bruce Lee saw that too. And I was like, he nailed it. That's perfect, because he did do that. And he did change a lot of minds. And he created mixed martial arts, like literally created mixed martial arts. And people who now follow this new sport and have this love of Asian cinema or martial arts or anything owe that to Bruce Lee. Whether you're a fan of Jackie Chan, whether you're a fan of Jet Li, whoever it may be, you still owe it to the GOAT, which is Bruce Lee. And I love that. I love seeing that.
Yeah. Another thing that I want to shout out were a couple of stories that they kind of showed in the movie where he was in college and he took him and some friends to the movies, and they saw The Orphan, and they literally saw Bruce Lee starring in a whole Hong Kong film that he was starring in, and he was just a random college student to them. I thought that scene was funny. And I think the style choice they made to like not really show any interviews, just have voiceover.
Yeah, what did you think of that?
Over footage. I thought that was a really bold choice. I think it was great. It shows you how much Bruce Lee's life was in the limelight, and how much he kind of, just from childhood all the way up into his death, was in the public eye, and how much his and how much footage there is of him. Frankly, I think back to that Amy documentary that came out, I believe, in 2015, and how that movie kind of had that same kind of style where they really just have voiceover and video footage of Amy. And I thought that movie was interesting, because I think in the 2010s, it's interesting that we see a movie that, you know, a celebrity of the 2000s has so much cameras and footage around them that it would be easy to make a documentary about that. I wonder how easy it would be for somebody who's like an older figure. But this documentary actually proved that that is possible. It is possible to have, especially if it's somebody like Bruce Lee, who was so famous, it is possible to have so much footage and so much clips and so much archives of him during his life. So it was really dope and really interesting.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's definitely the standout, is the way they did that, and it's absolutely fascinating. I love that scene too, just to kind of finish up the idea of how Bruce Lee was always hanging out with minorities. It was a Mexican dude and a black dude.
Yeah.
Apologies, I forget their names, but they said like they would go out, and it was always like the minority crowd. In San Francisco. It kind of reminded me of my childhood and how that was kind of what it was for me too.
Yeah.
So it's always just me with like my Asian homie and my black homie, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm the Mexican guy. But I love that idea of the impact that he can have on different communities, like you said, the African American community.
Yeah.
And literally any other minority watching them, like me, obviously the Latino community.
Right.
It really is something powerful, the impact he can have. But either way, guys, that is our thoughts on Be Water, the new 30 for 30 documentary. Have you seen it? Are you going to see it? Let us know in the comments down below. What do you think if you did see it? We are still going to be here reviewing movies. Obviously, we have a full schedule this week as well, so make sure you guys tune in. For the First Cut crew, I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
Before
We're peacing out. Peace out, guys.
like water. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.